Hello and welcome to another program challenge video for ROBOTC. This is the final video for the final challenge, which is challenge 8, where we will be learning about if-else statements. In the previous challenge, we did while loops. We learned about while loops, which are infinite loops, which can be helpful. However, when you start getting into more complicated code, you're going to learn that best practices include not using while loops when you can use an if-else statement. In other words, you want a way to get out of the loop if you need to. So, as with our previous projects, we're going to start in our home drive, in our My Robotics folder, and we're going to find the challenge that we're working on, which is challenge 8, if-else statements. Double click on that. That should open up ROBOTC, and we're ready to go. All right, so as mentioned, the first thing we're going to do is we are going to come up to text functions. Now we are using a while statement for this. This is a loop. However, we're going to have an out. So we're going to go to control structures and expand that. We're going to go to control structures again, expand that, and we're going to drag out our while condition body. So bring that down, and we can collapse this. Now I just want to point something out. Notice that when I bring out the while statement, it lines it up exactly with the task main. Now that can work, but the practice of using indentations makes the formatting a little easier to see with our human eyes. Now, it's a cool feature in ROBOTC. If you come up to fix formatting, I'm going to click on that. I want you to watch what it does. Essentially, it's going to indent all this right here. So fix formatting, and it indents them. That just makes it easier to keep track, especially when you start having all these curly braces that are part of the program. Okay? All right. So next, let's turn our attention to the while statement. So in other words, while this is happening, the rest of this will happen. So for the condition of this while statement, what we're going to do is something that we haven't done before. So first I'm going to get rid of where this says condition. And what we put in is going to be within these parentheses. So first thing I want to do is I want to come up to sensors and expand that, expand variables, and I want to drag out this sensor value and put it right in between the while parentheses. So there we go. And the sensor value that this is looking for is our bump switch. Okay? So next, what we want to do is in the area between these two brackets, we want to put in our bump switch, because this is the sensor value that it's looking for. So bump switch. We're using camel case. And right after the bracket, right after the closing bracket, but before the closing parentheses, we're also going to put some code. We're going to put a space, we're going to put two equal signs, then a 0, and what that means is while this sensor value, the bump switch, is not pressed, so in other words, as long as the bump switch is not pressed, it should do this. Okay, so that'll be the comment for that. So this initiates the while loop. Let me put it in position. Or begins. So begins the loop and continues as long as the bump switch is not pressed. Okay? This is our out. Okay, so we've got the while loop, the infinite loop. It's going to go on until the bump switch is pressed. So as long as the sensor value bump switch is equal to 0, okay, is equal to 0. So in other words, remember with our bump switches, they're digital. It's either on, which is a 1, or off, which is a 0. So as soon as you press the bump switch, that's going to tell the program, oh, 0, and it's going to shut it down. Okay. So next, we're going to begin filling in the body of our while statement. Now, we're going to come up again to control structures, if statements. Let me get rid of where this says body. And I'm going to drag out this if condition body else body. So I'm going to drag that out, put it right here. Okay, and notice with the indentations, once again, it's just a little easier to read. Okay, now, so for the condition of this if statement, we're going to drag out another sensor value. So let's go to, well, we still have it open under sensors, variables, sensor value. That is going to go right where the condition is. So let's get rid of that, and we'll drag out sensor value, put it right in between the parentheses after the if. And the sensor that it's looking for is the limit switch. So limit switch. And remember, we're using the camel case. And then right after the, once again, right after the closing bracket, before the closing parentheses, we're going to put a space, equal sign, and we're going to put a 1. Okay? So what this means, and we'll put that in our comments, is that as long as the limit switch is pressed, then the following will happen. Okay? So, as long as the limit switch is pressed, then, okay, then the following will happen. And what will happen? Well, whatever is contained here in the body, whatever we tell it to happen. So, all right. So next, what we want to happen as long as the limit switch is pressed down is we want to turn a green LED light on. So let's go down to natural language, special, and turn LED light. Well, before I do that, let me get rid of the body. Turn LED light on, and we have to name it so it knows which port. It's the green LED, and we'll put our comment in. Turn the green LED light on, and then the next thing we want to happen is we want to start a motor. So we'll go up to movement, start motor. Okay, so we're going to start motor. We'll do right motor, right, and then remember we want to make sure that we put in our camel case, and then we want to give it the speed. And we're going to do half speed, 63. So let's add a comment that explains that. Start right motor at half speed. Okay. All right, so there's our if statement. And notice I've got an extra space here. I'm just going to get rid of that. Line up my brackets, okay, my curly braces, I should say. So we got our if statement. This is our opening curly brace, our closing curly brace for the if statement. So everything that this if statement is executing is inside these two curly braces, okay? So far we've got when it starts, as long as the bump switch is not pressed, it should do all this. All what? Well, first, if the limit switch is pressed, turns on the green LED, starts the motor. Else, in other words, what happens if you let go of the limit switch? Well, that's what happens in the else area. Okay? All right, so else, well, we're going to tell it to turn off the LED. Let me get rid of the body right there. So turn off LED. Which LED? The green one. Green LED. Turn off green LED light. And then we want it to turn off the motor. Stop the motor. Tilt the motor port. Turn off the right motor. All right, and then I can close this up as well, so I could bring I can bring this curly brace up just so it looks a little neater. Make sure it's lined up with the one above it. So again, so for the else statement, here's the opening curly brace, here's the body, what's supposed to happen in there, and this is the closing. Okay? Now, just like the if and the else have opening and closing curly braces, if you remember, our while statement has opening and closing curly braces as well. Now this whole space right here that you're seeing, the computer doesn't even read that. The program doesn't even read that. This is mainly for us. I'm just going to line these up a little bit better. Oops, I got rid of it altogether, which I didn't mean to do. Bring it back. And I just want to make sure that it's lined up with this one. I could use one more space. So, and I can even leave myself a little note by saying that this is where the while statement ends. It can be a little confusing, admittedly, to keep track of these opening and closing curly braces. So it's not a terrible idea to add a comment for them. And I could even do one for here and say this is where the else statement ends. And hopefully you know by now that the program, the compiler, does not read anything that is after, anything that's basically a comment, anything that's after one of these double forward lines. Okay, and this happens to be right here. This closing curling brace is paired with the task main, and that's where the program ends. And once again, we could bring that up if we wanted to as well. Just have it nice and tidy. All right. So once again, what's happening here is when we start the program, a loop starts, a while loop. But it's not an infinite loop because we've got an out. What's the out? Well, as soon as the bump switch is pressed, it stops. But if the bump switch isn't pressed, what happens is it runs this if statement. If the limit switch is pressed and held down, then it'll turn the green LED light on. It'll start the motor. Else, which means if we let go of the limit switch, it'll turn the green LED light off and stop the motor. So we'll save it, compile it to make sure we don't have any errors. We have to do that anyway. Download it to the robot. And then when we hit start, it'll be ready to go. And you'll see, as this short video shows, that once again, as soon as I hold down the limit switch, the green light turns on, the right motor turns on. As soon as I let go of the limit switch, the green light goes off, the motor turns off. And it'll do this over and over, just in a loop. As long as I press that switch, that'll happen. What'll break this, in other words, what'll stop the program from working, and shut it down, is if I press the bump switch. Okay?